There is a moment I will never forget. I was sitting on the cold tile floor of my kitchen, my back against the cabinet under the sink, knees pulled up to my chest, staring at a final notice envelope I had been too frightened to open for 3 days. The light above the stove was the only thing on in the entire apartment, and it cast this thin, yellowish glow over everything, making the whole room look like a photograph taken in the wrong decade. I was 29 years old. I had a graduate degree. I had done every single thing I was told would lead to a life of abundance and security, and I was sitting on a kitchen floor, unable to open an envelope. That night changed everything, but not in the way I expected. It did not change because I found a new job the next morning, or because some unexpected check arrived in the mail. It changed because of something my neighbor Zipporah told me the following week, something she had learned from her grandmother Adosia, who had carried it from a very old community in the mountains of a country most people have never thought about twice. What Zipporah described to me that afternoon, over bitter tea and a plate of dried figs, sounded almost too quiet to be powerful. It was 60 seconds, a single minute, and I remember thinking as she described it that it could not possibly be real, that something this old, this simple, this unassuming could not be the thing standing between me and a completely different life. But I was already sitting on kitchen floors. I had nothing left to protect by being skeptical. Let me tell you where this comes from, because the origin is the part that most people completely skip over, and the origin is exactly why it works. For centuries, certain Jewish communities developed what scholars of mystical tradition sometimes call practical Kabbalah. Not the celebrity version, not the red string bracelet version, but the actual, ancient, extraordinarily detailed system of understanding how energy moves through a human life, and how a human being participates in that movement. Within this tradition, there is a concept that does not translate perfectly into English, but the closest approximation is something like the space between wanting and receiving. The ancient teachers who devoted their lives to understanding this system noticed something that modern neuroscience has only recently begun to articulate in its own language, that the human mind, when left entirely undirected, has a powerful and almost gravitational tendency to organize itself around lack, around what is missing, around what has not yet arrived, and that this orientation, when it becomes habitual and unconscious, creates a kind of invisible wall between a person and everything they are trying to build. The practice Zipporah taught me is a distillation of something that was passed through specific family lines and specific communities for generations, precisely because it was too effective to be left unguarded and too fragile to survive being treated carelessly. It is not a spell. It is not a superstition. It is an extraordinarily precise 60-second recalibration of the most fundamental thing a human being carries with them every hour of every day, the quality of their inner attention. I want to tell you what happened to me before I tell you what to actually do, because the sequence matters. Because you need to understand what this practice touched in my life before you can really appreciate why I am standing here in front of a camera, talking about a piece of ancient wisdom I learned from a woman who drinks her tea with a small silver spoon that belonged to her grandmother. After Zipporah taught me, I began the practice the following morning. I will be honest with you, the first 3 days felt like nothing. I sat in that same kitchen, this time at the table and not the floor, and I did the 60 seconds, and I got up and went about my day, and nothing dramatic happened. On the 4th day, I received a phone call about a freelance project I had applied for months earlier and completely forgotten about. On the 7th day, a woman I had lost touch with named Rosenblum Kahane, and I want you to really hear that name because she is a real person who changed my life, reached out to me about a collaboration that ended up generating more income in a single month than I had made in the previous 6 combined. On the 12th day, I found a solution to a financial situation that I had genuinely believed was permanent, not a lucky accident. A solution I engineered myself, using a clarity of thinking I had not had access to in years. Now, I am not telling you those things to impress you. I am telling you those things because I later went back and looked very carefully at what had actually changed. And the answer was not my circumstances, not at first. What changed first was the quality of my attention, my inner dialogue, the automatic, barely conscious narrative that was running underneath every single thing I did. The one that said things like, "This probably won't work," and "People like me don't get things like that," and "Even if it comes, something will go wrong." That narrative is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not feel like a villain. It feels like realism. It feels like just being smart about expectations. But it is a wall. And this practice is what began to dissolve it. Here is what the practice actually is. You choose a specific 60-second window. This is not a casual or vague instruction. The teachers who refined this over generations were extraordinarily clear that the window must be chosen in advance and must be consistent, because the power of this practice is cumulative, and consistency is what builds the accumulation. The most traditional window is in the first minutes after you wake, before you look at your phone, before you speak to anyone, before you allow the stream of daily information to begin flowing into your mind. That window, according to the ancient teachers, is when the inner architecture is most permeable, most capable of being shaped. Zipporah described it to me as the moment when the house has no furniture yet, when everything you place there that morning will stay there and organize the rest of the day around itself. During those 60 seconds, you do something that sounds almost embarrassingly simple when I describe it, but that requires a specific kind of precision to do correctly. You hold a single image in your mind, not a list, not a collection of things, one image, of yourself in a state of having already received what you are working toward. And here is the part that most people either miss entirely or do it wrong. The image must be felt, not just seen. The ancient tradition was very specific about this distinction. There is a Hebrew concept that Zipporah used. She translated it roughly as living from within the image, rather than looking at the image from the outside. Looking at a picture of a life you want is entirely different from standing inside that life and letting your body register what it would actually feel like to be there. The first is a wish. The second is a rehearsal. And the nervous system does not distinguish between a vividly rehearsed reality and an actual one. I want to pause here and tell you something about a woman named Tsivia Moran, because her story is not mine to tell in full, but she gave me permission to share the outline of it. Tsivia had been running a small business for 11 years that had never quite broken through to real sustainability. She was talented. She was dedicated. She worked harder than almost anyone I have ever met personally. And she was stuck at the same ceiling year after year. When she began this practice, she told me that for the first 2 weeks it felt mechanical, like going through motions. But she was consistent. She did not skip a morning. And somewhere around the 3rd week, she described something that I recognized immediately from my own experience. She said it was like something in her chest that had been clenched for years quietly opened. Not dramatically, not in a burst, just opened. And the decisions she made that month were different from the decisions she had always made before, because the lens she was looking through had changed. Her business had its best quarter in its entire 11-year history in the 90 days following that opening. I am not saying that 60 seconds replaces strategy, replaces effort, replaces planning, replaces skill. This is crucial, and I will not let you leave this without understanding it. The ancient teachers never claimed that this practice would do the work for you. What they claimed, and what the evidence of my own life and the lives of the people I have shared this with bears out, is that it removes the invisible obstruction, the thing that was silently redirecting your effort away from where you were trying to go. Think of it this way. If you are a river and there is a dam of compressed internal resistance somewhere in your course, it does not matter how much water is being fed in from above. The dam determines where the water goes. This practice addresses the dam. There is a second element to the 60 seconds that Zipporah was very careful to include, and I want to make sure you have it, because doing the practice without this second element is like having a key but no lock. The ancient teachers called it Hakarat Hatov in the broader tradition, which translates approximately to recognition of goodness. But in this specific practice, it is applied in a way that goes beyond general gratitude. During the last portion of the 60 seconds, after you have lived inside your future image, you deliberately recall one specific moment from your past in which you had already received something, anything, that you had once wanted and then forgotten to be grateful for. Not a grand thing, One of Zipporah's teachers used to say that the best memory to use is one that is so ordinary you almost forgot it qualified. Because the universe, in this tradition, does not distinguish between a small delivery and a large one. Every fulfilled desire is evidence of the same mechanism at work. And when you consciously return your attention to that evidence, you are teaching the deeper parts of your mind a different story about who you are in relationship to abundance. Not someone waiting for it to arrive, someone for whom it has already arrived many times and will again. Now I want to address the thing I know some of you are thinking, because I thought it too. Sitting across from Zipporah with my dried fig and my skepticism, I thought, this sounds like positive thinking. I thought, I have tried positive thinking. I thought, positive thinking did not save me from that kitchen floor. And Zipporah, who is a woman of extraordinary patience and no small amount of humor, smiled at me when I said that and said something I have turned over in my mind many times since. She said that positive thinking is a billboard. It is something you put up outside, visible to others, perhaps even visible to your own surface. But this practice is not a billboard. This practice is a renovation. It goes into the rooms that nobody else sees, that you yourself rarely enter consciously, and it begins, one morning at a time, one 60-second window at a time, to shift what is actually living there, the furniture of your inner life, the default orientation of your attention when no one is watching, including yourself. I have taught this practice to 14 people in my personal life and followed up with 12 of them over at least a 90-day period. I am not a scientist. I cannot offer you a controlled study. What I can offer you is that of those 12, 9 reported specific, measurable changes in their financial circumstances within 90 days, and the other 3 reported significant changes in their clarity, decision-making, and the quality of opportunities that began appearing in their lives. None of them had any background in mystical tradition. Several of them were quite skeptical. All of them were consistent. There is one more element I want to give you, and it comes from Adosia, Zipporah's grandmother, who is no longer alive, but whose words have been repeated to me so many times that they feel like something I remember rather than something I was told. Adosia used to say that money is not a thing you acquire. Money is a frequency you learn to inhabit, and that most people spend their entire lives standing just outside the door of that frequency, pressing their nose against the glass, wondering why it never opens. Not because they lack ambition, and not because they lack skill, and not because the universe has particular feelings about them as individuals, but because the way they hold their inner attention is pointed, at the deepest level, at the closed door rather than at the life on the other side of it. 60 seconds, every morning, before the phone, before the noise, before the day organizes you rather than you organizing the day. Choose your image carefully. Choose one that is specific enough to be real, but expansive enough to surprise you. Do not choose a number or a figure or a goal as the image. The ancient teachers were clear that numerical targets engage the analytical mind, and the analytical mind is not the instrument this practice is designed for. Choose a scene, a moment, yourself in a specific location, doing a specific thing, carrying the physical feeling of having arrived. Step inside it. Let your body believe it for 60 seconds. Then bring up your one small evidence of past receiving, and release both into the morning. That is the practice. That is what Zipporah gave me over tea and dried figs on a Tuesday afternoon when I was 29 years old and had been sitting on kitchen floors. That is what I am giving you now. I do not take lightly the responsibility of sharing something this old and this specific. I want you to know that. Zipporah's family carried this through circumstances that most of us will never face, through generations of difficulty that would have extinguished anything that was not genuinely powerful enough to justify protecting. The fact that it survived means something. The fact that it reached me means something. The fact that it is reaching you right now, through this screen, in this peculiar and improbable chain of transmission, I believe that means something too. Start tomorrow, not next week, not when things settle down, tomorrow morning. Set whatever you need to set to wake up 2 minutes earlier than usual. Give the practice its 60 seconds before you give the morning to anything else. Do it for 30 consecutive days without evaluation, without keeping score, without standing back to check whether it is working. The teachers were insistent on this. Evaluation during the practice period is the same as a gardener who digs up the seed every 3 days to check if it is growing yet. Let it grow, and then come back here and tell me what happened. If this reached you today, if something in you recognized what I was describing before I even finished describing it, that recognition is not nothing. That recognition is your deeper attention, telling you that it already knows the way. There is so much more where this came from. This channel exists to share exactly these kinds of buried, protected, quietly extraordinary pieces of wisdom from traditions that most of the modern world has either forgotten or never encountered. Wisdom about wealth, about clarity, about how human beings actually function beneath all of the noise of contemporary life. If you are not subscribed yet, I want to ask you to do that now. Not as a favor to me, but as a favor to the version of yourself who is going to be watching this channel 6 months from now and thinking about how different things look. Subscribe. Turn on the notification. Stay close. There is so much more coming, and I do not want you to miss a single piece of it.